This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, novelist, playwright, and screenwriter Stephen Fife, has also written feature articles for the New York Times, New Republic, Village Voice, New York Newsday, and American Theater. His screenplay, The Falling Man, has won several awards. Steve's most recent novel, Angel's Glance, has just been published and is available on Amazon. The story is about a 40-something filmmaker, David Lang, and 40-ish cabaret singer Holly Markham, who seem to have finally reached the end of their turbulent relationship when Holly discovers that she's pregnant. While she's in sheer terror, David is distracted by the otherworldly being he sees on their bed. Steve also penned The 13th Boy, a memoir of education and abuse, which is the story of his experience at the prestigious Horace Mann School in New York City, and also the book Best Revenge, How the Theater Saved My Life and Has Been Killing Me Ever Since. His two books of poetry include Dreaming in the Maze of Love, Grief, Madness, and Twisted Hipster. Three of his plays, Savage World, Break of Day, and This Is Not What I Ordered, are published by Samuel French. His adaptation of Sholem Asch's God of Vengeance was produced off-Broadway by the Jewish Repertory Theater and has been performed all over the world. So for all of those reasons, I'm thrilled to have the great writer Stephen Fife on StoryBeat today. Steve, thanks for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a bit about your background. At what age did you start to write?
I started to write about 15. And
what got you into it? What happened?
What happened was basically, puberty. And
that little thing.
Yeah, that little thing. And I'm the oldest of four boys, and so it's a very very male, very competitive kind of family.
Mm-hmm.
And my father's a businessman. My mom is a politician.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was actually deputy mayor of New York City.
Really?
Eventually, yes. Yeah, so I grew up with politicians in the house, and my father was very vocal on the phone, so I had, the sense of, my father was a very Trumpian character.
Trumpian?
Very Trumpian, yes. Kind of a Democrat Trump.
Wow.
Yeah, always seeking, the kind of big score as a businessman,
right.
And he became a venture capitalist, and always trying to make $100 million zillion, and so I kind of found writing as a private place that I could get some kind of retreat to a bit.
And you had stories to tell.
I I had stories to tell. I had just a lot of inner conflict, most of it of the adolescent variety.
Sure.
At 15.
At puberty.
Yes, but not to get into kind of a very dark topic immediately, but as I related in the book that you mentioned, The 13th Boy,
right.
I had been molested by a housekeeper actually at 8. And at 15, I moved into the room in which she molested me.
Oh, my goodness.
So I actually didn't make the connection at the time because I had repressed it to such a degree. but later on, when I went into therapy and met with a shrink on a regular basis, I started to see that may have contributed.
Did not just going through that, but obviously then dealing with it therapeutically, has that had a huge influence on what you write and the way you write it?
Well, yeah, it did. It did. I went through such an unusual situation with this teacher because I wasn't. When he got hold of me, I was already 16, and it was the late 60s, and I wasn't a virgin, and I had various sexual experiences already, and yet I went to an all-boys school,
right?
Which was already kind of odd, in terms of getting, socially acclimated, as it were. You see boys all day. Anyway, it all threw me into a funk after I left high school, and then the relative I was closest to, who was my mother's sister, my aunt, she was a brilliant woman. She was a professor at NYU, and just a beautiful person. She died in a fire on New Year's Eve, along with her youngest child, her only boy. And so that happened when I was, I guess, still 18. And
so years
anyway,
of trauma.
it all kind of came together, and I went through a few years of really fighting to kind of stay in the world.
Sure. Oh, wow. I mean, you had nothing but trauma for quite a few years in your youth.
I really did. And I didn't. My mom, who's herself a brilliant woman, did not really believe in going to shrinks. So I didn't actually get to see a shrink until after my aunt died, because that she could understand as something that was traumatic, but she didn't really understand what I was going through before that. But in any case, at that time there weren't clinics on every corner, and so I kind of had to deal with my own stuff my own way. So I kept notebooks, and I still have. In my senior year of high school, I completed over 100 notebooks.
Wow.
I know.
What kind of notebook? Spiral bound?
Yeah, just like spiral bound notebooks, and it was almost like it was an addiction, really. But it kept me sane.
Oh, it was your release. You had to let it out.
Exactly.
And
So I was just like, as soon as I'd finish a notebook, I had to start a new one.
Wow.
Because it was so scary for me not to be recording like every thought that I had.
And I can't imagine that has not been maybe perhaps the major influence of your writing career. That's probably directed everything you've pushed for in terms of your writing.
Definitely.
I mean, that's knock wood. I've never had that kind of trauma, so it's a little hard for me to relate. I've had a relatively good life by comparison without that kind of trauma. Although I've had my share of traumatic moments, but not like that. And so, how has that impacted your discipline and all the rest of it? Are you a very disciplined writer?
I am now. For years, it took me years to get that. It really did. And it was partly because, I had a lot of discipline of a strange sort when I was in high school, because I not just kept these notebooks, but I read constantly. I hardly ever slept, because sleeping was so scary to me. Because when I go to sleep, I'd have these dreams that were so traumatic and so terrifying, that I was literally afraid of sleeping.
Are your dreams now a source of writing inspiration?
They are, and the main character in Angel's Glance records a lot of his dreams, and they're part of the book. And
So
as
Angel's
you might
Glance,
imagine,
Angel's Glance is a kind of a process book. Then
it's completely a process book. It's because Angel's Glance, which is an autobiographical novel, I did go through events similar to the ones described in the book, in which the 40-something filmmaker, which I was 40-something writer and screenwriter, was with a beautiful, talented, complicated woman, and we had a turbulent relationship, and I was away for a month doing theater, and when I came back, basically she had told me it was all over, and then we got involved a little bit again, and then she got pregnant.
So that's the underlying basis for an entire novel.
And that's yes, and I kept very diligent notes when that happened, and so including my dreams, and so the dreams that I attribute to the main character are variations on my own dreams, because there's an integrity to dream logic that I could only mess with that so much.
Are you able to manipulate your dreams?
No.
Because I have friends who have the ability to, they know they're in the dream, they recognize they're in a dream, and they can manipulate it. They can say, I'm going this way, not that way. And so,
wow.
And then they wake up and remember it. Now, I, on the other hand, I don't remember most of my dreams. I'm one of those people. I barely remember them. You're lucky that you do, I think.
Yeah, I have a huge volume filled that I just wrote dreams in for years, and it's like several hundred pages long.
Wow.
And I actually have never looked into it. I'm like terrified of some of the dreams I was having back then. But I do. Well, I have a lot of dreams in which I'm aware in the dream of having a dream, but I'm not able to manipulate it. And I wouldn't really want to manipulate it, because I'm really interested in which way it goes, of its own.
But that makes total sense to me. But at the same time, when you're in it and you recognize you're in it, you just go with the flow at that point, right?
Exactly. And then I usually do remember those dreams.
And do you keep a pad of paper by your bed so that you can write them down right away, or do you remember them in the morning?
I do. Unfortunately, sometimes I wake up like in the middle of the night and write down, but I'll write down like key words from the dream. Like, I have one that was like, bikini, sunshine, Woody Allen sex comedy. And then I woke up and had no idea what that dream was.
You just knew it was a sunny beach with Woody Allen.
Yes, definitely something was going on of interest in that dream. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like fun, but I really didn't remember one thing about it.
So I know that some of my better ideas come before I go to sleep, and I have a pad of paper next to my bed, and sometimes I will I'll actually just sit up in bed in the dark and jot notes in the dark on a pad. Do you turn the lights on, or are you able to write in the dark?
No, I have to turn the lights on.
So I'm pretty successful at writing in the dark, where I can somewhat read them most of the time, but I do have some that I go, I'm writing this down, and then I wake up in the morning, I have no idea what it says, because it's just this big scribbly whatever. But if you turn the lights on, then how do you? So I'm getting real personal here, but do you have no problem going back to sleep, or does that then interrupt your sleep?
It depends. Usually, I have no trouble going back to sleep.
That's good.
But yeah, sleep has always been, like because of the events I described to you before,
Mm-hmm.
there were years where I really had trouble sleeping. And in fact, way back, I would, I took Valium and then got addicted to Valium and had to get off of that. And
Aye, aye, aye.
I know. So sleep has been a huge issue for me, just in terms, and I keep really weird hours, and I certainly thought that would change, after I passed 50,
Mm-hmm.
but it has not. And I literally up at 4:00 in the morning, often texting people or emailing them, and then their response is, "What are you doing up at 4 in the morning?" And it's just kind of how my brain works.
So I'm curious. You've written 2 books at least that are in a way either truly autobiographical or based on your autobiography.
Right.
Do you, so from a technical perspective or a legal perspective, do you need permission from the people you write about who are still living to base characters on them?
Well, you don't. You really don't.
How does it work? I think it's
in
interesting.
terms of the woman, that is the basis for the main character, I did tell her, when I wrote the first draft of the book, I told her I was writing this, and I gave her the opportunity to read it at the time, and she said she didn't want to, because of how emotionally traumatic and difficult the time was for her.
Of course.
That she, but she said if it ever gets published, then, please let me read it before it gets published. So when Scott Davis of Cuden Books said that he would publish this, I did let her know that and kept her in the loop and sent her copies of, PDFs of the book, and she kept losing the PDFs, and I would send it to her again and again, and then it finally became clear that there was something going on here beyond just simply losing emails.
Mm-hmm.
And then I gave her a copy of the book, and then she read like the first few pages, and she said, she thought it was beautifully written, but just way too difficult for her still to kind of deal with.
Sure.
The events, but she has given me her blessing. So
that's the key I was getting to, especially for the audience of people who may be thinking about writing something like what you've done. And what does it require? And there's the answer. You're saying you went and got her blessing, but you didn't. So I imagine it's possible that she may have said, no, don't publish it. And then what would you have done? Would you have published anyway?
I don't know.
So
I don't know, because this story is so important to me. And it's not, it's both of our stories.
Right.
It's very much her story as well as my story.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something really unusual in the book. The book starts off with the main character having a mystical experience. And the mystical experience that character had is something that I had. And it's the only mystical experience I've ever had like that. So, I'm a writer, and I had a mystical experience. I mean, I have to write about that.
Of course.
You're
compelled.
Yes. I mean, because, and when people say, well, it's a dream, you had a dream, and it's like, I know what a dream is, and this was not a dream. This was literally having an out-of-body experience in which, I heard the voice of God, and things transpired that were way beyond my ability to imagine them.
Okay, so I'm fascinated by that. How did you know it was God?
Well, again, I say God because I don't know what other... I heard a voice which was an authoritative voice.
Right.
And whose message was something that I could never have conjured up, and it was from the deepest, it came both from inside me and also from a force that had nothing to do with me. And
you somehow
so I
recognize
call
that
it
as
God
Okay.
because I have no other way to attribute it.
But the voice didn't say to you, "I am God."
No, it did not say I'm God.
This is something that you surmised.
Right. The voice told me that I was seeing something that was always there, but that human beings usually didn't see, but that a veil had been pushed aside so I could see it. But it didn't tell me why, and that's really what the book is about, is trying to figure out what it means.
And do you think you got to that answer?
I think I got to that answer in the best way I could, which is there's an implied answer. But the main character experiences a lot of frustration in the book because he wants a more definite answer than what he ultimately gets.
Mm-hmm.
He wants something that, because it was such a, again, otherworldly type experience, and because it seemed to mean something, it was so it's a unique experience. So why did it happen? Why did that thing happen? It must have meant something, that had a kind of overarching meaning in terms of the character's life, and certainly, that I felt in terms of my life, and I did come to a conclusion, and anyway, the character came to a conclusion by the end of the book.
And so that's what you start with.
Yeah, that's what I start with.
Wow. Okay. So so you're seeking that answer along with the other answers in the book, clearly, and that's
Right.
those are usually the best kinds of stories anyway, where a protagonist is seeking an answer or some kind of goal or an answer, and this is of a spiritual nature, I guess, and so that can be very, very powerful.
Well, it's a spiritual nature, but also the book is very much about like the question of destiny. Like, is destiny? I mean, do we each have a destiny, or is that simply a construct?
So I have, I teach screenwriting here in Pittsburgh, and one of the concepts that we discuss on a regular basis is the difference between fate and destiny, and that fate is something that you can't change. You were born male at a certain time in a certain city of parents, and you couldn't help that. That's fate, and that destiny there's an opportunity in destiny for you to make a decision, because it's the same root as the word destination. So you can sometimes make a decision as to where your destiny is, or where you're going.
Well, it's true, but there's also inherent in the idea of destiny is that there's a sense of purpose.
Sure.
That just like a destination, you're going somewhere
to a place, of course.
Exactly.
And that can be, and destiny in storytelling can be many different things. It's not just a location; it's many different kinds of destiny. So you can get to
Exactly.
what you're seeking. You can be seeking a higher purpose, and that's your destiny.
Right, and that whole idea of like epiphany. Epiphany usually has to do with feeling like you understand your destiny.
Sure. And
so, yeah.
And it's okay. Do you have in the book many epiphanies? Does the character come to various epiphanies?
Well, the character is seeking an epiphany.
Uh-huh.
And he again he's trying to understand this very cryptic experience he had, which seems again to come from a force outside of himself.
Right.
And yet seems to have a very specific purpose, and yet he's constantly trying to find out, like, the veil was pushed aside for him. He saw something. What does that something mean, and how does it relate to what he's supposed to be doing in life. And so those are the questions he's dealing with throughout, and they, at various points, I mean, he does conjure an answer to that for himself, and yet he comes to question whether the answer that he has come up with has any validity, because it keeps getting contradicted by experience.
That's very powerful, because that's what I think a lot of people experience in life is that contradiction of, this is what maybe life should be, this is what I think that I want to do, but then things either get in the way or contradict it. So
exactly.
That's very human. I mean, it's really human. And
yeah, well, that's been my experience. I mean, I had an epiphany at like 16, after I'd been writing for a year, and then I got really serious about it, and then I felt like, well, this is what I need. This is who I am. This is what I need to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I was going to be, I was a poet. I started as a poet, and then there were these two very powerful and intellectually gifted men who were the writing teachers at Horace Mann.
Right.
And they really, validated that epiphany that I had. They were very, they had all these expectations for me, and gave me a sense that I did have a destiny, and one of them wrote an article for the school newspaper, which, again, you're in high school, but still, Horace Mann is one of those schools that takes itself so seriously. And, and he wrote this article that I was already writing better poetry than, people who had gotten the Pulitzer Prize. And
well, that's a nice compliment.
He expected me to win the Pulitzer before I was 30. And
no pressure there.
No pressure there. The thing was, as the oldest son of a Jewish, upwardly mobile family, with kind of high aspirations, as it were, social aspirations, I already had quite a few expectations put on me. Quite a lot of pressure there already.
Yeah, no doubt. But you got encouragement from teachers.
Yeah, I did.
And that probably cemented things for you that you weren't so certain about.
Well, it did until until these teachers, had revealed their own dark sides, and that
threw you into a turmoil.
It really did. It really did, because then I wondered, well, do I really have talent, or is this just something they're saying, to basically get me into bed, to be blunt about it?
Wow. Well, at what point in this process that you went through of discovering yourself as an artist, as a writer, at what point along this road did you think to yourself, you know what, I am pretty good at this. I am a decent writer. I'm worthy in that way.
Yeah, it's funny that's really didn't come until my 30s, I would say.
So quite a while.
Even though I had already been published in the in the New York Times and other places.
Right.
I mean, I knew that I had a facility. I knew that I was I had analytical ability, and I could write. But it was just. My life didn't proceed as I had expected it to. I mean, once I kind of found poetry and fell in love with poetry,
mm-hmm.
I just thought that was going to be my life. And what happened was I went from Horace Mann, I got into Columbia, and I studied with Kenneth Koch, who's a very good poet, and certainly at that time had a huge reputation. He was, an associate of John Ashbery, and, in Columbia is where Ginsberg went to school, Allen Ginsberg.
Right.
And, there's just a great tradition there. And the first year, it's, I did very well, but it started to just be hard for me to sit in a room by myself.
Oh, well, that's
and you talk about
everything.
discipline, at 19, after all the trauma that I had, and then when my aunt dying, it started to get really scary.
Did you keep writing all through that, though?
I kept writing through that, but then, I'd always loved theater also. Like when I was in grade school, I was always like the lead in plays and stuff.
Right.
And then I went to Horace Mann, which again is so competitive, and after puberty, I became a lot more self-conscious than I had been before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually like participated in theater in running the light board or being a stage manager or something. But I did enjoy theater, and then in my first year of college, I got interested in theater, thinking that I could write plays. And people said, well, you need to really see things from the actor's point of view. So then I started taking some acting classes, and that was just working with other people, just being in rooms with other people was very healing to me. After just feeling so traumatized and alone.
You went from you somehow managed to, whether you were pushed to it or you pushed yourself to it, you got out of that thing called isolation that most writers experience, and found a way to be around humans.
Yes.
And I think that's incredibly important for artists that do what we do, because heaven knows I've spent countless thousands of hours alone in a room, just like you have, and it can be really difficult after a while, and you have to find your way outside.
Yeah, and I just really, I'm really glad I did that. At the time, I felt like a failure because, I had this destiny I thought I had for, as a poet, and
Right.
I was kind of putting that aside and doing things with people that I found fun and enjoyed, and yet they didn't seem to have the seriousness. Not that theater isn't serious; it's very serious. And believe me, the people I studied with, took it extremely seriously.
Right.
But it's just a much more sociable art form.
Well, of course, it's a collaborative art form. I'm curious on taking this slightly into the mundane to say, did the notion of making a living factor into your transitions from thing to thing? Because I can't imagine that being a poet is usually a high-paying occupation.
Right.
And frankly, neither is the theater unless you get lucky,
Well, very much so. But again, that time was less focused on money than this time is.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that you didn't have to pay the rent.
Sure.
But for instance, I was living with a girlfriend in the early 70s in the West Village, and our apartment was a one-floor walk-up, 3 rooms, and we paid $83 for it.
That much?
Yes, that much.
In New York?
On a beautiful street in, on the edge of Little Italy.
Wow.
I know. So even though money was a consideration, it just didn't dominate everything the way it. And pizza was like a quarter. I mean, it was, it was very cheap.
I don't think you could get a good cardboard box in New York for that these days.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. I was very lucky, but at the same point, that wasn't so unusual. I mean, it was, it's really hard to. I mean, it just seems like a million years ago now that could have been possible.
Well, understandably.
But and New York is so expensive now. It's just so expensive.
Crazy.
I mean, I had to leave New York just because it was just impossible.
But you also then went to Los Angeles, which is not exactly cheap. It's just cheaper.
It's way cheaper. When I got out here, it was. I mean, it's gotten more expensive. But when I got out here, I could live so much more cheaply here
Of course. Yeah,
than in
no
New York.
question. No question.
And the only big expense is a car and gas, and if your car breaks down, fixing it.
And rent if you're in the wrong neighborhood.
Well, rent is now huge. I mean, again, I was lucky. I found a place that is still rent controlled out here. There's very little that's still rent controlled. And I
like
do live in a rental rather than, I don't have a big house with a pool, which
Right.
is, definitely was my goal.
Oh well, yeah, I've had the big house with the pool, and I can tell you, it's less fun than you think, because you're constantly tending to things and paying for things. It's
Yeah,
it's a
I've
little
seen that
more.
with friends of mine. I have seen that with friends of mine, and I know I am a little spoiled that way because of a rental. They do come and fix things for me.
Absolutely. Well, so let's. I'm curious. You are a traveler in many genres. Obviously a poet, obviously a playwright. You be a screenwriter, novelist. You've written articles and so on. Do you have a genre that's your favorite?
Well, I mean, the most native genre to me probably is a novel, because it combines, it can be poetic, it can be dramatic. You can kind of be anything, and you don't have to depend on other people. I mean, it's not a collaborative art form.
Definitely.
I love poetry, but there's just, I don't know who I'm writing it for anymore. It's literally like speaking, Yiddish, in a town where nobody else speaks Yiddish.
Well, the other, again, I don't mean to dwell on the mundane at all, but how do you make a living as a poet?
Well, I don't make a living as a poet.
Well, exactly.
I mean,
that's the
I
problem.
didn't make any. The two poetry books I had published, I knew I wasn't going to make any money on them. I mean, there's somebody who's now been adapting some of my poems into songs, and maybe he'll write a song that will get some traction and make some money. I don't know.
Now, lyricists can make money.
Right.
And it is the funny thing, people think poetry are lyrics and that lyrics are poetry, but really they're not. Sometimes they are, but most of the time they are not. They're two different disciplines, two different craft forms, all the rest of it. They share, in some poetry and lyrics, they share rhyme schemes and things like that. So there are shared aspects of it, but they're not the same at all. I think that novel writing is akin to being a painter. It's you control it. You might ultimately have somebody that comes in and looks at a painting if you're a painter, and they say, if only that were blue instead of green, and you might think to yourself, I think that criticism is correct, and you might make a change or not. And unless you have an editor, which hopefully you ultimately do, nobody's telling you what to do in your novel either. So to me, those two art forms are alike in that way.
It's true, but it's still hard. I mean, it's just living in Los Angeles area. It's not that people don't read here; it's that they read so many scripts.
Right.
They're just constantly reading scripts out here, and to get people to read something for pleasure it's very difficult.
Sure, especially anybody in the industry. That's for sure.
Most people I know are in the industry or industry related.
Well, and notoriously, nobody in the industry likes to read at all, even scripts.
No.
You have to pull teeth to get certain people to read scripts.
I am telling you, Steve, I am something of a book fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I love about living in Los Angeles is that nobody cares about their books here the way they do in New York. Like, in New York, I knew several other book fanatics who were even more fanatical than me.
Right.
And had even more books than I did. But out here, I seem to have cornered the market, at least in the observable reality that of people I encounter, of people who still love books.
Sure.
I go into homes of people who have made so much money and are in the arts, and there's just no books anywhere.
Right. Well, yeah, for sure.
I can't get over it. Where's your bookcase? I just don't. I can't orient myself to the reality of a home without a bookcase.
Well, that has been true out there for some time, is that most people are not reading books out there. It's interesting. New York and LA obviously share similar roots, but I think somehow in my head, and it may just be my perspective, but I think of New York as being intellectual and the mind, and I think of Los Angeles as being the heart and the soul. And yet New York has that too, but I think of them different in that way, that New York is more of the mind and Los Angeles is more of the heart. That's just the way it is in my head. I don't know if that's true or not, but
I don't know. They're both so money obsessed now.
That we can count on. Money obsession is a big deal.
When I go back to New York now, and I'm about to go back again next week, it's painful to just feel the absence of so much that made New York soulful before.
You think that's gone?
I think so much of it is gone, and what's not already gone is leaving.
What has changed it? What do you think has changed that?
It's rents. Rents have gone sky high.
It's not 9/11. It's not politics. It's money.
It's money. It's money, and a sense that people. People are obsessed with their phones. They're on the internet. The reality, of beautiful. I mean, the Strand is still there. There's still places. The Strand bookstore. But I mean, it used to be great movie houses, great bookstores, great cafes. There used to be just a much more conversational sense of people relating to each other.
Well, dare I say it, over time it has become less bohemian and more corporate.
And that's true about theater, too. It's like, I mean, you can make money at the top end of theater, as you know.
I know it well. Knock wood. Thank the Lord.
Yeah. I mean, there is money to be made, and you're like the 1% who actually made it.
Yeah, well,
it's.
I thank my lucky stars every day, and it's like hitting the lotto. It really is.
Yeah, I have not made money in the theater. I'm sad to say. I have had plays produced. I've written a lot, but it's money has really eluded me in the theater, and
I would say you're very much the norm.
I know, and
Sadly.
yet I go into like the drama bookshop in New York, and there are all these people who, just because I've had a few plays published by Samuel French, they think that's, if only I could have those, if only I could have what he has.
Of course.
And so it's, it's this strange pecking order.
But by the way, I don't know if you know this, but the drama bookshop has lost its lease and is moving somewhere where they don't know yet, but they can't afford to be in there anymore. And I'm very friendly with the drama bookshop, and for those of you listening, anytime you want to buy books in the theater or about movies, use the drama bookshop, because they're one of the great last independent booksellers in the world that focuses on a specific thing, and that is what we do in theater and film, and mostly theater.
Exactly.
But they're not going out of business; they're just having to move. So
right.
That's disruptive to any business. But my fingers are crossed for them that they'll move to a good place and do as well or better.
Right. They really are in kind of an odd situation there on 40th Street.
Yeah, they're in a strange location in the middle of some sort of the outskirts of Broadway.
I mean, they should be, if they're going to be in that area, they should be more in the in the Broadway theater area.
I think that will also change the character of it, if they're in the wrong place, it'll become too touristy, which might be good for
Yeah.
business, but will change the character of what that store is. But that's all to be seen. So I'm curious, what do you do to stay sharp as a writer? What is it that you do? Continue to journal, or what do you do?
I don't really journal. I now only jot down those things that you were talking about, which are either dreams or ideas for things.
Mm-hmm.
And even the ideas, I just jot down the slightest, I don't really go into it. Because if I do, then I won't actually write it most of the time.
Because you will have written it.
Exactly. If I know too much about it, then I'm not going to write it.
Mm-hmm. So then what's your daily routine? What do you do?
My daily routine is basically, how do I continue to make some money in this world?
Yeah, well.
and then I'm currently rewriting somebody's very bad screenplay.
Right.
And even there, I'm a very good rewriter, but I have to have some kind of connection to the piece to really improve it. So it's not going as fast as I would like it to.
Right.
I'm very fast rewriting my own stuff, but it's I have to get the logic of the piece. I have to really feel inside of that logic to do a good job with it, and I don't like doing a bad job of anything.
If you don't feel what how does this thing work, how do you proceed?
Right.
You've got to know how it works.
Right. Right now I have a bunch of projects that are kind of like balls in the air. I have like 3 different novels that I've started writing and kind of made extensive notes for. And if I have a chance, I will go back to those and work on those and try to move, push that ball a little bit up the hill.
Right.
And I have a few screenplays that I'm still writing.
So you keep many projects going at one time.
I do.
And do you find that that's helpful to keep you fresh on each one that you're not working on at the moment?
Well, I'm really waiting for something to catch fire. And
as long as it's not your pants, you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah, or my house.
Or your house.
But yeah, I'm really waiting to get inspired to the degree that, Wally Shawn talks about, that he needs to see like a crack in the door. He needs to have the door open a bit. And once he sees kind of like the light on the other side of the door,
mm-hmm.
he can more easily push it open and walk through it.
That makes sense.
That's how I feel about it.
I've had the good fortune to spend a tiny amount of time with the great Wallace Shawn many years ago, and he's an unusual man, but so brilliant.
Yeah, definitely.
Truly
I
brilliant.
knew him really long. I knew him in the 70s.
Well, that was before he was known as Wally Shawn.
Yes, when he was just a very strange guy.
Yeah.
I knew him as an actor.
Was
as a stage actor.
It's well before Princess Bride, and
well before any of that.
Yeah, and before any of that, before any of his.
And he just
plays.
had such an unusual voice, and and then when you talk to him, he was so funny.
Oh, he's hilarious, and he is brilliant. His work is brilliant.
He is brilliant. He's genuinely brilliant,
and talk about a guy who's poetic in his writing. His writing is very poetic.
I know.
Just spectacular.
I know. I edited a collection of monologues for actors over 40
right.
A few years ago, and just going back to his play Aunt Dan and Lemon.
Right.
I was just bowled over by how brilliant those monologues are. Oh,
mm-hmm.
my God.
Mm-hmm. I worked on a show of his called Marie and Bruce.
Sure. I saw Marie and Bruce years ago.
Very unusual play, and very,
Yes.
very smart dialogue writing.
Oh, yeah.
Do you usually work from an outline when you're working, or do you just go?
On film, I work from an outline.
And on novels, you do not?
No, not at all. I really, if I know where the novel's going, I'll never get there.
Interesting.
So I really write to find out what's going to happen.
Why do you feel like you need the outline in screenwriting then?
Yeah, well, in screenwriting, you know, as I'm sure you know, it's just like there's a craft element to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Where you really, you know, every scene has to move the story forward, and you have to know where you're going to be able to do that.
I agree. I wanted to hear you say that. I totally agree. Screenwriting is a fairly specific and disciplined form. You can only go to so many pages. You can't explore every nook and cranny of everything. You've got to, like you say, move the story forward at all times. And so, yes, I think novels frequently do not require an outline, but screenplays do. I'm glad to hear you say that sort of continues a long path of justification of that thinking. Although there are very good screenwriters that don't use outlines, but I think they're the exception and not the rule.
I mean, sometimes I'll have an outline, and it's just when I try to flesh it out, it's just not working. I realize that I'm being too methodical, and I'm kind of boring myself, you know, in terms of like how the story is unfolding.
Right.
So I will sometimes rethink. I'll, you know, see. Oh, wait a minute. You know, this can be told much better. You know, in different order, or you know, or that maybe, you know, maybe the ending is not. You know, maybe I need to tweak that a little bit.
Right.
But in general, when I try to write a screenplay without an outline, it ends up being a very lengthy process.
Right. That makes sense. Would you call yourself an inveterate rewriter, or do you try to get it right on the first or second pass totally?
Well, I'd love to get it right on the first or second pass totally. I end up being a pretty inveterate rewriter, and I become a really good rewriter, I think. In that I think I improve things. I know a lot of writers who have a terrible tendency to complicate what they write when they go in, rather than to improve it.
They gum it up. They make it worse.
Exactly. They have this insecurity that makes them, you know, create more obstacles in the story than the story can withstand, can hold. And you just end up getting exhausted and finally kind of throw up your hands and like, I don't care anymore where it goes.
Right.
But I think I'm really good at streamlining.
That's important. I mean,
yeah, I think that my experience in the theater has really helped me understand how to tell a story. And I think I didn't, because I really tried to be a novelist. When I graduated college, I got hired right away by the Village Voice to be the theater features writer.
Okay.
And I had never written for any kind of I'd never written on deadline before, except when you in school and you have a paper due. But you know, it's not the same thing.
Not the same thing.
Not at all. Especially not when there's money at
right.
stake.
Different kind of pressure entirely.
Exactly. And also, only your teacher is going to read it, whereas here, you know, everybody is going to be judging you. And you're writing for an editor who can easily say this sucks, and you know, and it's all in vain. But so you know, and I worked with a really good editor at the Village Voice named Ross Wetston, who was a big fish in that pond back then. I think he'd actually been the editor-in-chief of the Village Voice for a period of time. But he had studied with the Russian writer Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov.
Oh, just that guy.
Yeah, at Princeton, I think it was.
Just Lolita, that's all.
Yes, just that guy. And so his feeling for words was, I mean, everything. He was so influenced by Nabokov, and the sense of importance he brought to the craft of writing.
Mm-hmm.
He really taught me a lot about how to structure a story and how to structure the telling and the various ways that you can kind of speak to the reader, and then going from that to the playwriting is completely different, and everything I've done has shown me different ways of telling a story and different ways of getting inside the reader or the audience's head.
Do you feel that playwriting has been the fundamental basis for everything else?
Well, it was the thing I did worst, because I really was a good, kind of analytical writer coming out of college, and that's what made me a pretty good journalist.
Right.
Was that I knew how to get kind of to the heart of what I was trying to say, and then tell the story so that it made that point by the end.
Mm-hmm.
But playwriting doesn't, when I tried to write plays, it didn't. You have to write for the actor, and again, that's something that took me a long time to do. It was something I knew I was really bad at, and for a number of years, I failed at it, and it was really painful to fail at something that's writing. That's an aspect of writing.
What a marvelous lesson for the listeners of this podcast. Keep in mind what Steve just said. He said two important things. One is that he failed a lot, and there's no shame in failure as an artist. You must fail in order to succeed. And the second thing that he said is that he kept at it, and so he didn't give up. And those two elements, being unafraid of failure and not giving up, are, I think, fundamental to success.
I can't tell you how painful it was.
And painful, but you're...
The thing about failing as a playwright is, like, I went to Columbia to get my MFA in playwriting.
Right.
And they have, in the class, they have actors who come in and read your scenes, and and everybody else in the class becomes the audience, and sometimes the stuff I wrote was so bad that people would laugh at it.
Oh, God.
And it's like...
But you weren't intending it to be a comedy. That's the problem.
I wasn't. That was not my intention.
Because if it was a comedy, that would be a fine thing.
Yes, it would be fine if it was, and yet it, what I was doing was I was just writing badly. I was just giving the actors things to say that just simply didn't sound right in a person's mouth. It didn't come out right.
If only you had had a horse.
And it was so, and by that point, I had been published in the New York Times, I'd been published in the Village Voice, I'd been published in the New Republic, and then here were, I was a little older than most of the people in my class. And so here were these kind of pimple-faced kids laughing at me. It was very hard. And after the first, it's a 2-year academic program. There's actually a third year where you're off campus. But between the first and the second year, they wanted to throw me out. They said, well, you're not really making progress. And we had such high hopes for you. And you kind of suck.
Wow. Now.
I'm telling you, it was like, I mean, it was painful enough to be laughed at, but to have the head of the program, dump on me like that, it was. And I said, there's no fucking way you're kicking me out of this program.
Did it light a fire under you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not that I didn't have a fire lit under me already. It's that I was making a transition from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. You really have to think differently as a playwright. You really don't have, control. I mean, words are not important in the same way on stage. I mean, words are important, but they're not, when words are said as dialogue, it's just they take on, actors can make things sound one way or another way, completely different.
Sure, I think it's more about what characters do and don't do, as much, if not more, than the words themselves.
Right, it's a lot more about behavior, and also letting the meaning of whatever you've written emerge from the interaction of the characters, then, from an idea that people talk about. And it just took me a while to make that transition. And I did eventually make it, but, and they did, at Columbia, they did eventually say, that I had done a good job and that I had, kind of, they were glad they had kept me in the program, but it was, that was definitely
painful.
A terrible moment in my life.
Oh, painful.
So painful. So painful. And, and again, it goes, but it goes to the kind of character you are. Not that, I don't like to fail, it's true. But at the same point, I had to get over, my fear of public failure.
Well, nobody that I know of likes to fail, but the difference between someone like you, who's kept after it, and someone who goes away and does something else with their life rather than what their goal was, is persistence and the willingness to bear up under that failure. That's a big difference between, there's no one I know of that says to themselves, they wake up in the morning and say, hey, I hope I fail today. Nobody says that, but people who do fail wake up and say, I'm going to try again. And that is a significant difference. What for you makes a good story good?
The biggest quality is unpredictable.
Unpredictable.
Unpredictable. If I know where it's going,
it's boring.
I just tune out.
Yeah, it's boring.
Yeah. And plus, as I've gotten older, I really have a sense of how many things are not what I assume them to be. That life is quite you think you have control over it, and then it just shows you that you don't. And I like stories where people have to deal with stuff like that.
Well, what was John Lennon's line that is usually attributed to John Lennon, but probably really was George Bernard Shaw, that life is what happens while you're busy making plans?
Right.
And that's what it is. It's
like a lot of the characters in my plays make plans that don't work out.
That's good.
Yeah, and they have to reformulate, or as they say in the GPS, recalculate.
Recalculating. That's the transformation, is to go from your expectation over to what you actually have to deal with. That's part of that character.
I'm constantly recalculating. I am definitely not where I thought I would be at this point, but in some ways I'm very happy where I am, and in other ways not so much.
Well, I think that the liking where you are is always wonderful, but the not liking where you are at the same time, I think, is what keeps people going. And I think the moment that you've arrived, you think you've arrived, and that's it, you're done. So you need to have that impetus of saying, I didn't get it, I'm still going to work at it.
Well, my life definitely changed about 10 years ago when I had a near-death experience.
Ooh.
A real near-death, like I was on the freeway and it was raining and my car hydroplaned into the median.
Ooh.
And then did 360s across the freeway.
Ooh.
And I should have died, but and then my car was going over the side, which definitely would have killed me.
Ooh.
But I pulled it out of this death spiral at the very last minute. And it's like, and as I was sitting on the side of the road, where of course not one person in the Los Angeles freeway came over to see if I was okay.
Of course not.
Not one person. Amazing. But as I was sitting there, and I was not hurt. I did not injure myself in the least. My car was destroyed.
But shook up a little, no doubt.
Oh, very shook up. And then people who later came to see my car said, "You should have died."
Uh-huh.
It was only because I was driving an old Mercedes that was built like a tank, that that I didn't die. But at that moment, I just felt like, okay, like I've been working, but at the same point, I've been letting a lot of things slide, and now I understand that I am going to die. And that I only have a limited amount of time, and I have to do the best I can with what I have during the time I have left, whatever that is.
And I hear you. That is absolutely a good philosophy to have.
Yeah.
Because
so that is when I wake up in the morning. I definitely am thinking, what can I do today to move that rock up the hill?
Well, just don't be Sisyphus and have it keep dropping back down to the bottom.
Well, sometimes it does.
It does indeed. Well, Steve, we're well into over an hour of the show, and we're coming toward the end. And
Sure.
This has been a really fantastic, information-packed hour. And I'm wondering, you've clearly met and dealt with lots of people in the industry and in novel writing and in so on. Do you have an oddball or weird or quirky or strange story, something funny that you can relate to us?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I have two, and
Sure.
I promise they won't go on long.
No problem. Love it.
One has to do. I have a book called "Best Revenge: How the Theater Saved My Life," and it's been killing me ever since.
Yeah.
And that basically tells the story in which I was given an assignment or given to adapt a Jewish play called God of Vengeance, a Yiddish play. And the production I was doing it for was starring F. Murray Abraham.
Okay.
And this was back in 1992. And F. Murray had won the Oscar in, I think it was 84, 85.
For Amadeus.
Right, for Amadeus. So he was a big deal. But I had actually known F. Murray before that, like in the late 70s, when he was just another off-Broadway actor, a brilliant one, who I loved his work, and he was a very nice, approachable guy. But so I was contacted by this theater, to ask if I wanted to do this, and I said sure. And they said, well, you have to get F. Murray's permission, before you get the actual assignment. So I went to meet with F. Murray, who was playing the lead. The play is about a brothel keeper and his wife who are raising their daughter on the first floor to be a nice Jewish girl, to marry a rabbi's son, while in the basement he's running a brothel.
Nice.
Yeah. And the brothel has young women exactly the same age as his daughter.
Oh.
So obvious hypocrisy going on.
Right.
And F. Murray was playing the brothel keeper. So, I went and met with him, and he was he obviously didn't remember me, but he was extremely, detached, and said, that I had written some plays, and I gave him, and he said no, he needed to see me adapt a sample scene from Sholem Asch's play, which is weird, to adapt a sample scene. I mean, you might as well adapt the whole play. I mean, you don't. But so, that's what he wanted. I went and I did that with the help of a Yiddish scholar, because I know some Yiddish, but not well enough to really go into the weeds of, the language. And so I brought him that, and he was okay with it. So I got hired. But then when we would have story conferences with F. Murray and the director and myself, the director and F. Murray would talk the whole time about porno tapes. That their favorite porno tapes. And I'm like, not interested. This is not a subject I want to go into. And what was even weirder was, well, I don't know if it's even weirder, but it was additionally weird, is that F. Murray would bring a 6-pack of beer, in cans, and then he and the director would proceed to drink all 6. They would never give me one. I would not get any beer.
You got.
So I had to,
let's see. You got
discuss.
You got no porno and no beer. That's not good.
And no, it was terrible. And plus, F. Murray wouldn't speak with me. He insisted on speaking to the director to tell me, even though I was sitting 2 feet away from him. So, and then, but the thing was, we had sold out the entire run of the show. Plus, there was a Broadway producer who already was looking for theaters that we could move the production into. He hadn't even seen a rehearsal.
Oh my goodness!
Just the fact that F. Murray, who again, he was an Oscar-winning actor, and that his name carried enough clout in the Broadway community that this was, this was potentially going to Broadway, and so, I was willing to kind of withstand anything.
Mm-hmm.
But the day before rehearsal started, F. Murray left to do a movie in Italy, and he never came back.
Oh my goodness!
So he completely blew us off after the whole thing. So, my feelings about F. Murray are not, to this day, not very positive, shall we say? Even though I think he's a brilliant actor.
He is a brilliant actor. Isn't it interesting sometimes that the heroes that you think are your heroes, when you meet them and work with them, sometimes they're a little disappointing?
Well, that goes to the other story I want to tell is about meeting Sam Shepard.
Okay. And
Sam absolutely, was my theater god.
Sure.
And throughout the 70s, I was constantly walking into rooms that he had recently left.
Oh, wow.
And people would say, oh, Sam was just here and this and that. And I was like such a fan. And I mean, I just loved his plays, and his plays were a huge influence on me. And I was dying to meet him. And I was in a company on the island of Nantucket for a summer, and one of the actors in the company was a friend of Sam's, and he said, "Oh, Sam is coming, to see me here, and we're gonna smoke some weed. You want to come with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." I was like 19 years old. I was like, "Yes, absolutely. Oh my God." But eventually Sam came, and they went off by themselves. They didn't take me, so I had to hear about it, which was terrible.
It sounds like it could be a title for your new play. Sam Shepard was just here.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. And then the play God of Vengeance that I had done, off Broadway in '92, it was done in '97 down in Atlanta with the great director Joe Chaikin directing it.
Absolutely.
And that's really the core of my theater memoir, is working with Joe Chaikin, who was another one of my theater gods, and just a lovely guy and very spiritual. And the experience of working with him was an extremely spiritual and fascinating one. And so that's what made me feel like there was material there for a book. And I'm happy it got published, because when a director dies, especially a theater director, there's just not a lot to kind of tell you who that person was and why people had such a profound feeling for them.
Right.
And so I hope I captured some of that in the book. But in any case, Joe died in 2002, I believe, and he had a memorial service, which I came back to New York for, and Sam read some work at the memorial service that the two of them had written together. It was very moving. And afterwards, I was looking forward to saying hello to him. Well, Sam came out of this was down at the West Bank Theater Bar in Midtown Manhattan on 9th Avenue and 42nd Street. Which I say, just there's, the whole place was taken over by this memorial, and Sam came out from kind of a back room, and he made like a beeline for me, and he put his arm around me, and the next thing I know, I was drinking at the bar with Sam Shepard.
Wow.
I know, and I mean, I literally had never met him before. I'm pretty sure he thought I was somebody else. I would love to think that Joe had talked to him about me, because he'd certainly talked to me about Sam, but I doubt it.
He thought he was drinking with a guy named Bob.
I really think that that he just thought he knew me, and we spent really this next couple of hours drinking at the bar and talking, and it was a beautiful experience.
Well, I'm glad that you had that. I would have loved to have had that. He's a hero.
Yeah, he's and again he was very much a certain type of guy. I mean, that's the thing about heroes, is that they're icons until you meet them, and then you see, well, they're people. They're just people.
Right, sure. Yeah.
And Sam said some very stupid things, and Sam said some very brilliant things.
Well, I'm very glad that you got that experience.
Yeah. One of the weirder things he said to me was he suddenly turned to me and said that this was after quite a few drinks, and he was a serious drinker. I mean, I'm more of a recreational drinker,
mm-hmm.
but I mean, he put stuff away like, I mean, he would just put tequila shots down, and I mean, I was in awe.
Huh.
But he turned to me and said, so the Arabs and the Jews, what's that about?
Did you solve the problem?
I said if I knew the answer to that, I'd be working at the UN. I would not be.
You'd be if you had the answer to that, you'd be filthy rich.
Damn, man, definitely. I don't know why. I mean, we weren't even talking anything Jewish, so I don't even know. I guess I just looked so Jewish that was something he felt that he should say. But it was one of the weirdest things anybody's ever said to me. And
well, it's nice to know that he was trying to work it out with you.
Yeah. I mean, it was very, it was in between. I mean, he had women coming up to him all night who apparently he was supposed to show up to meet with at various places at various times, and he had not shown up. So.
Oh, that's funny. So, all right, last question for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a good, solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to those who are trying to make it in the business, or who are in there but are trying to go further?
My best tip is to keep learning from experience. As everything is a learning experience. It really is.
I think that's extremely wise. Without doing that, you fall asleep, and you need to keep learning.
It's so hard to be a writer and continue being a writer, and it's so hard to write well, and then it's so hard to get your stuff recognized when you do write well.
That's
a
fact.
The best thing you can do is also you have to develop patience. I'm not a particularly patient person, but I've had to,
learn.
I've had to learn to develop patience.
Yeah, you and me both. I think that both points are extremely true, and I think both are very wise pieces of advice for those that are trying to make their way in the business. Well, Steve, this has been a great joy to have you on the show today, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you and hearing about your history and all of your experiences, because I think there's a lot of value for those artists out there that are looking for inspiration in what you've had to say.
Thanks. Well, I wish them well. I really do.
Well, good. Thank you. And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.